Good evening. My name is Jeff Butts, and as co-chair of Urban Planning Club, I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's event. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our co-sponsors, the Portland State Educational Activities Speakers Board, Metro, the Oregon Transportation Research and Education Consortium, and the Toulan School of Urban Studies and Planning. Also, I'd like to thank the World Affairs Council and Portland Center Stage for helping secure tonight's venue. Portland Center Stage wanted me to tell you that they do wonderful events here, and you can pick up a brochure on the way out. And also, personally, I'd like to thank everyone in Planning Club who has helped make this event possible. So, now, to introduce tonight's guest speaker, please help me welcome Portland's Mayor, Sam Adams, to the stage.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome. I've always wanted to walk out of a door that was labeled boarding. It's a real honor for me to be here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge, in addition to the list that Jeff talked about, Portland Center Stage for their fine hospitality. And what a great place to have this, talking about smart transportation, sustainability. We're in the sub-basement of what used to be an armory, but then for about 7 years was also the Blitz Weinhardt Brewery, remade over in a public-private partnership that is now Portland Center Stage. It's really my honor to introduce Enrique Peñalosa, former mayor of Bogota from 1998 to 2001. I've never had the opportunity to introduce someone who was described by a major publication as the 14th best thinker in the world just a couple of years ago. But it comes with a further disclaimer that the small print was, but he's the 7th best thinker of people that are alive. I know. 14th among dead and alive, and 7th smartest of people that are alive. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to bike with the mayor as part of our first Sunday Parkways, where we had 28,000 participants. And of course, we stole that idea from Bogota, Colombia, and from the good mayor that you are going to hear from. We have 4 more, so you can go to sundayparkways.org and learn more about it. But in the meantime, we get an opportunity to hear from someone who doesn't let the lack of resources, who doesn't allow for difficult circumstances to prevent him or allow anybody else in the world not to move forward on smart transportation choices. The triple bottom line, sustainability. We might use different terms, but they're all the same thing about making life better for us, but also leaving a better life than those who come after us. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Peñalosa.
Even with all those crazy things he mentioned. Anyway, I'm very glad to be here with you. And of course, I will mention some of the things we did in Bogota, but I will try to go beyond that and make some comments on Portland and things that could be done in Portland. And of course, I hope that at least some people may be upset or disagree fully with what I will say, because otherwise it's not useful. Anyway, here I was yesterday, very happy with the Sunday. Oh, first I want to thank very much the young people who got me here. Jeff and his friends, thank you. I am very happy to be in this city, which is, of course, an example of sustainability and good efforts towards making better cities to the United States and to the world. I enjoyed this very much. Yesterday, I brought the good weather, I am told. Certainly not from Bogota, which we have more rain than Portland. This is our Sunday ciclovia, which I must make clear, it was not created by me, it's from much before. We improved it and made it longer and all this, but we get more than 1 million people every Sunday for about 7 hours, which is very interesting. Why ciclovia is so interesting? Because it's a ritual where people reconquer the space. It's always fun to do things you are not allowed to, you know? Since you are little, they tell you, don't go into the street, don't go into the street, you know? And then all of a sudden you are in this place where you're not allowed to be. And also it's a ritual of reconquering the city from cars. We also did something very interesting. In a referendum, we asked people to vote where they wanted to have a car-free day every year. This is a 7.5 million city, and this is a totally car-free day. No cars except taxis and buses can be out in the street that day. And despite a huge opposition by some business, we were able to get this approved. And so this cannot be changed, not even by Congress, not even by the president, because this was approved through the vote of the people. And the interesting thing is that 99.9% of the people go to work as usual, go to study, go to everything. And it's an interesting exercise to prove that we can live in a different way. We even asked for something more radical in that referendum. We asked whether the people want to completely ban cars 2 hours in peak hour, 2 peak hours in the morning and 2 peak hours in the afternoon every day, the beginning of the year 2015. This was in 2009 or something like this. No, it was in 2000, I'm sorry. The people who were against us knew they were going to lose. So they did not ask people to vote no, but they asked people not to vote, because we were required to have 33.3% of potential voters' participation in order for this to be legally mandatory. And we missed it like by 2 per 1,000 points to the threshold that was necessary. That would have been a radical change for a city. Anyway, now, can we design a transport system without knowing what kind of city we want? I don't think it's possible, because clearly it's totally different if what we have as a goal is to have Houston than if what we want is something more like Amsterdam. But even before we know what kind of city we want, we almost have to know how do we want to live, because a city really is only a means to a way of life. So this is really fascinating. The real issue is not transport. The real issue is what kind of city, what kind of life we want. And clearly there is no correct solution for this. This is almost closer to religion than to engineering. This is why it's fascinating to talk about all these issues. How does a city like Amsterdam with 2 million inhabitants move 40% of these people by bicycle every day? Now, conceiving a city is fascinating because first it's about life and happiness. So it's a lot of fun. Second, there is no right or wrong. There is not like a right way exact of doing it. But then also I think it's because we have an intuition that what we have now is really wrong and that we need something very, very different than what we have now. What is a good city? I propose what I like very much a definition by a wonderful Danish urbanist called Jan Gehl, who says that a good city is one where we like to be out in public space, in sidewalks, in parks, in plazas, not inside a shopping mall or not inside our home. We love to go out with any pretext. Like in Turkey here, in Istanbul, in many dozens, maybe hundreds of streets where they have restaurants out in the streets, and plazas, in parks, like in Central Park. I mean, now, what is a good city? One that tends to some needs that we have. I think we have some needs, not to survive, needs to be happy. We need to walk. We are a pedestrian animal of sorts. We need to walk, not to survive. We could survive inside an apartment all our life, just the same way a bird survives inside a cage. But we suspect the bird would be happier inside a cage the size of this auditorium, and happier still flying free. So in the same way, we are happy in a 10-meter wide sidewalk than in a 2-meter wide sidewalk. But this is not something we can prove. I cannot prove mathematically that it's better to have a 10-meter wide sidewalk. It's something we feel in our soul, in our heart. It's much, I mean, we don't have to be in this beautiful auditorium. We could be meeting in a room, maybe the very low roof, and not all of these wonderful things. We would feel something different in our hearts. So this is the same way with cities. It's not something that we can really have a manual of how exactly to do this or not to do it. So we want to be with people. This is some old Portland's picture I had of good sidewalks. We need also to see people. For example, even also in a book by Jan Gehl, it said how the benches most used in parks were those where most people walk by. People love to go to restaurants where the restaurant is full. People like to go to the beach. I mean, they could take sunbathe in the roof of the building, but of course it's much more fun in the beach where you can see people, and we like to be in places with people. We like to be also in contact with nature, with trees, with water. A city that is good for vulnerable citizens. I would say if a city is good for children, for the elderly, for the handicapped, for the poor, it tends to be good for everybody else. But of course, cities tend to be designed by adults with cars, not by children. So this is an interesting picture, for example, because see, there is a very wealthy city. The Netherlands has a higher income per capita than the United States, and no cars in the picture, but this is very usual in many Dutch cities. City for children. We also need not to feel inferior. This is something we need to be happy. And a city that is good can help a lot to that. In a great city, rich and poor meet as equals in public spaces. It's not like when people go to shopping malls, which are geared to the rich or the poor or something. No, in the city in Madison Avenue or Park Avenue, rich and poor meet as equals there. They meet as equals in a great city, in public space, in cultural activities. But also a democratic city. I mean, the first article of the American Constitution says, all citizens are equal before the law. This is not just nice poetry. This is a very powerful statement. If all citizens are equal before the law, then a bus with 100 passengers has a right to 100 times more space in the road than a car with one. Or somebody in a bicycle has the same right to road space as somebody in a car. These are very powerful statements. Also, if all citizens are equal before the law, then public good prevails over private interests. And so, for example, there should never be private waterfronts in front of rivers or lakes or oceans. Always this should be public because it's such a pleasure-yielding gift from nature that this, especially around urban areas, they should never be private. Now, cars. There are two problems with cars, and the first is quality of life problems. It's not, regardless of whether the cars are electric or solar powered or anything, the problem is that cars kill people. And one time I watched a TV documentary, maybe an Animal Planet or something like this, about some herons in a Brazilian wetland. And I was very impressed because when baby herons would fall into the water, as soon as they would touch it, they would be eaten by some crocodiles or some. And I was I felt solidarity to the parents of the herons. And I say how horrible it is to have your children grow in danger of getting killed. And then it dawned upon me that it's exactly what happens to people. It's exactly what happens to children. Our children grow in danger of getting killed. So clearly there is a conflict, an ideological problem with cars. I mean, cars is a city can be friendly to cars or friendly to people. But there is also a technical problem. Clearly, we cannot solve mobility in large cities, giant cities like Bogota with cars, even if we wanted to. Just making bigger, this is not possible. When we tell a 3-year-old child anywhere in the world today, watch out, a car, the child will jump in fright, with a good reason, because there are tens of thousands of children every year who get killed by cars. In Colombia, for example, the main cause for children's deaths under 15 is that they get killed by cars. In all developing countries, more than 70% of people killed in traffic accidents are pedestrians and bicyclists. It's not the people who are in the cars, even though it's a very small minority. It's the people who are walking. But the most amazing thing is not that children are afraid of getting killed, that children grow under the threat of being killed. The amazing thing is that we think this is normal, that this is progress, that this is the way life is, and there is nothing to do about it. I mean, this is the way it is. I mean, we have gotten used to this, and this is fine. I think that this was not always like this. We have had cities for about 5,000 years. For 5,000 years, we had no cars. We only have had cars for about 80 years or so. And so for 5,000 years, a child could go like this Chinese boy, maybe not on a bicycle, but they could walk. He was not afraid. He could go for many blocks without any danger of getting killed. Now, a city friendly to cars or a city friendly to people, because there are some conflicts. And I might like to make clear that I'm not a car hater or any such things. I mean, I think cars can be wonderful for many things, such as going to the countryside and many things. Now, but there is a conflict. To whom do we give this space? To whom do we give the money? Do we invest in roads? Like in developing countries, you don't have enough money. You have to either invest in roads or in schools or in hospitals or in. So there is clearly a conflict for funds and a conflict for space. I mean, here you have cars above, cars below. I mean, very generous. They gave some space to people there. This is real life examples. This is not. High-velocity roads are like fences in a cow pasture. Clearly, you don't cross. Even the street grid, the grid of streets in the city doesn't cross them. So even if you're in a car, it reduces your freedom. There is a conflict, clearly, between a city that is pleasant for people and one that is good for cars. I mean, it's obvious all over the place. Here, you know, this is a very famous image. This is in Seoul, in Cheonggyecheon, they invested $9 billion to demolish this highway because they wanted to bring out this little creek under it, you know. And the people liked it so much, they elected this mayor, president of Korea. Here in Portland, they demolished the Harvard freeway, or Harvard something freeway, and they created this park. I mean, there have been many wonderful things that have. But because clearly there is a conflict. I mean, this is, I don't think it's any. Now, I would say a measure to evaluate anything that we're going to do in a city. Anything, a new building, a new stadium, a new anything. What is the measure? The measure, does it make its surroundings more pleasant for people to walk, to talk, to play? Does it improve the area around it? Or if we allow a building to do 20-story floors high, I mean, we are giving them a big privilege. What does it give the city in exchange in the ground? Cars, again, are extremely recent in human history. Sometimes we tend to think that before cars, we lived in caves. There was no life. I mean, really, many people think it's so far ago. No, before cars, I mean, as I said, this is Tokyo in the Middle Ages. Children could walk without any fear. Even when trams appeared, children could still walk. People could walk in the streets. This is, look, this is very advanced cities. This is Modena in Italy. Very wealthy cities, very sophisticated cities, and there were no cars yet. This is Paris, almost 1900. I mean, we must remember that before cars were invented, more than 100 years earlier, Beethoven had composed his music, and there was science and art. It's not like we were savages, you know. So this is Paris. Look at this wealth. This is an extremely sophisticated city before cars appeared. So life was possible without cars, you know. New York, 1905. I mean, it's a wealthy city, dynamic city, not yet cars. I think the 20th century will be remembered as a disastrous in urban history. I hope that in 200 years, people will say, how could those people live in those horrible cities in the year 2012? You know? In the same way we say how horrible it was London in 1800. Yet London at that time was the most advanced city in the planet, the model to the rest of the cities of the world. But how can it change? Well, this is some of the things I'd like to talk about. Towards the end of the 20th century, we realized that we had made a mistake, that we had made cities much more for cars, mobility, than for people's happiness, and that this was a mistake. So in Europe, we began to close streets, to make bigger sidewalks, to make a city like pedestrian streets. There is not one single town in Europe today or city which does not have at least some network of pedestrian streets only, or pedestrian-only streets. This is one of the most fantastic cities in the world, a small city, San Sebastián in Spain, Santiago. I mean, these two blind women, how could they enjoy the city without the threat, the noise, if they had not this very large network of pedestrian streets in Santiago? Even in Manhattan, you know, they did this wonderful, Janet Sadiq Khan and Mayor Bloomberg, they took half the space away from cars in Broadway a couple of years ago. And even in some parts, they took it away, completely closed Broadway altogether to cars. This is not just for a Sunday party, but it's permanent. Now, in Bogota, we did some interesting experiment I'd like to show you. We did a 24-kilometer, like about 17 mile, I suppose, Porvenir Promenade, a street only for pedestrian and bicycle in the outskirts of the city, where the city was growing very fast. Of course, after that, it has been hard for me to get into a helicopter. Once you're in a major, it's more difficult, you know, to get into a helicopter. But this is even a street like a pedestrian and bicycle highway. And all of these schools also we did not spend so much money on highways, so we were able to build these schools in the poorest neighborhoods and community centers. But see, this is, and then the next time is when you begin to have the city built, you know. This is 24 kilometers. I mean, it's in a dense city. This is the kind of thing I think could change life. You know, this picture is interesting. In some of these poorest neighborhoods of Bogota, where there is no pavement, I mean, we put sewage, we put water, we put fantastic schools, but no pavement. So here is a wonderful, high-quality pedestrian city, even underground cables, very fancy, pedestrian, the bicycles, and the car in the mud. So we are showing people they are important, not because they have a car, but because they are citizens, they are human beings. We are trying to construct to self-esteem. Again, schools, parks, the pedestrian promenade, Porvenir. Here is another picture in the process where this thing goes through. Now, this would change. World-class bicycle infrastructure totally protected. Like bicycle highways would completely change. This is another, I mean, we should have trees here, but anyway, this is the environment where this thing goes through. It's a very, very long, tens of thousands of bicycle riders go through it every day. So, but this is not just for poor citizens. This is, for example, in Germany, in Münster, the main street is a bicycle and pedestrian street only, and half the population of Münster bicycles to work every day. Where another project we did where the Japanese agency, cooperation agency, which are very dangerous because they are always proposing highways all over the place. I mean, Japanese produce more than half the cars in the world, so the biggest producers of cars in the world, directly or indirectly, so they are dangerous advisors in transport. I've seen them all over the world proposing elevated highways. So where they propose a highway, we made a 35-kilometer greenway, linking some of the richest to some of the poorest areas of Bogota. Along some drainage canals. Again, many people go to work here through this every day. I would say that bicycling is almost a more efficient way of walking. And this kind of infrastructure, they goes out to the countryside at the end to a park outside of the city. Now, why not imagine how your life is changed? Each of you, even in a suburb or downtown, it doesn't matter. If within 3-4 blocks of where you live, you would enter one of these giant pedestrian and bicycle-only streets, how much your life would be improved, your happiness. Even if you are not going to walk or to ride a bicycle, just to sit there and read the paper without the noise of cars, watching people going by. And this is so easy to do. This is a completely different city, a city which would have hundreds of kilometers of this network of pedestrian and bicycle only streets, it would change people's lives. Yet, it's very easy to do, especially in areas where cities are growing. Where the city is already built, it's a little more complicated. But how about taking, for example, some full lanes away from a Portland road? For example, why not take from here, all these take away from cars, to make a really fantastic wide sidewalk with a great wide bicycle, protected bicycle way in one of these arterial, because why we always give pedestrians these little things there, you know, and even when we were doing the bus network, I will show you later, the bus lanes were finished, but there were not yet buses there. And to go across the city in these giant bikeways was a totally different experience. Bicycles are a serious matter, and they need serious investment in infrastructure, such as here in Germany or in the Netherlands. This is what you get, you know, this kind of Portland, even if we have hills or in Bogota, now these modern electric bicycles, electric-aided bicycles, you can do anywhere, long distances, China, London, New York. In Bogota, we started, before any other country, we had, of course, bicycle ways in the Netherlands and in Denmark and in China, but it was a little crazy at that time where nobody almost used bicycles. And we did a huge investment, and we were able to increase bicycle use from 0 almost to 5% of the population, about almost 350,000 people daily. Now it's about 450 kilometers of physically protected bicycle ways. I do believe bicycle ways have to be physically protected, because even here where people are very respectful of traffic laws and all this, you may get 1 million drivers being respectful, but if one is not respectful, they may kill you or your child. So I think this is something necessary to try to go. Ideally, of course, the bikeway should continue at grade. But a protected bicycle way is a symbol of democracy. It shows that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car. Like, this guy is very proud of himself, you know? It's very important. I would say the important in Bogota of protected bicycle ways is at least 50%. 50% because it protects the cyclist. The other 50% because it increases the social status of the cyclist. It shows it's an important citizen who has rights. Moreover, I would say, is a protected bicycle way some kind of cute architectural feature? Or is it a right? This is an interesting question because, for example, today we accept that sidewalks are a right. If somebody in Portland would get hit by a car in a place where there is no sidewalk or the sidewalk is closed for some reason or another, I am sure they would sue government and they would get millions from government because they did not provide the sidewalk, which is a right. Are we agree? Now, is also a protected bicycle way a right? Or is it just some kind of cute thing we do if we want to do it or not? This is interesting because if we do not think it's a right, then the only people who have a right to safe mobility are those who have access to a motor vehicle, which I don't think would be very democratic. We have to arrive at some point to consider this as a right in every single street, protected, physically protected bicycle ways. This is my dream, my hope. I don't know if it's possible someday. Now, sidewalks. This is not so much an issue in Portland, where you have wonderful sidewalks. But it is an issue in most developing countries. I would say this is really what makes the difference between advanced and backward cities. Quality sidewalks, much more than subways or highways or anything else. What this shows is that this is a third-class citizen and the people in cars are first-class citizens. This is, of course, in developing countries, only maybe 10%, 20, 30% of people have cars at the most. Bogota, which is far from being the poorest developing country city, only 21% of homes have cars. Now, of households. This is not, you don't have to seek very hard to find these kind of pictures in the developing world. This is all over. See here, you have this horrible elevated flyover, which is useless for mobility in Chennai, but then they forget to make sidewalks next to it. Again, not even children are more important than cars. China is a disaster in most of its cities, even though it's very advanced in many ways, but it has much to do. Bogota, this is Bogota, still a disaster, but we made a lot of advance. I was almost impeached for this. I had my hair black before this. It was, people used to tell us, Mayor, don't be so stubborn, because there is enough space in sidewalks to park car. When I got to City Hall, maybe there was not one single block where you could go on a wheelchair from one corner to the other in Bogota. Cars were all over the sidewalks, and sometimes they were not even sidewalks. So people would tell me, you are so stubborn, Mayor, because we could park cars and still there is enough space for people to walk by. What does enough mean? So we had to have a TV commercial explaining. We tend to think that sidewalks are relatives of streets because they live next to each other. However, sidewalks are not for going from one place to another. They can be used for that, but sidewalks are for doing business, for watching the city, for playing, for kissing. In fact, sidewalks really are close relatives of parks or plazas. And to say that in a sidewalk there is enough space to park cars as well as for people to walk by is equivalent to saying that we could turn the main plaza in a city or the main park into an open-air parking lot so long as there is enough space between cars for people to walk by, which is crazy. So we had many other commercials trying to explain this. We had, for example, a commercial where some people were playing cars in the middle of the street, the main very congested, and people honking, and so we would say, just as people cannot be in the space of cars, the cars cannot be in the space of people. But of course, we didn't convince many people. I was almost impeached, but we won finally. Anyway, we got it. We made big sidewalks, all over hundreds of kilometers of big sidewalks, as big as we could make them. Anyway, so ideally, sidewalks, in my opinion, should continue at grade at the intersections, so that it's clear that is the cars that are entering the pedestrian space and not the pedestrians entering the car space, because the city is for people. It's a very nice, powerful symbol and very useful, especially if we have bikeways. Great sidewalks are what make a great city, like London, or this is maybe the most famous sidewalk in the world in Paris. How about telling the French in Champs-Élysées? I mean, half of that sidewalk is too much, you know? We could make parking bays, you know? So, now, transport. Transport, especially in the developing world, is a very peculiar problem, because most problems we have tend to be solved as we get richer. We have better hospitals, better schools, better housing, but transport gets worse because as people go longer distances and have more cars and have longer distances, traffic becomes worse. So clearly, it's almost by definition a non-sustainable thing, at least with the system we have. So typically in the United States, you have giant highways. This is Atlanta. And all studies show that traffic has been getting worse in every American city since 40 years ago. In all North America, including Canada, there is only one city where this has not happened, which is Vancouver, which is the only one which has not allowed to make big highways around it. So traffic is clearly not solved. Why do we not solve traffic? I mean, something seems to be. For example, it seems to us, it's very difficult, these political things which seem, because people vote according to what it seems to them, you know. It seems to us that it's the sun that goes around the earth. I would have never found by myself that it was the earth that went around, you know. So it seems to us when we are in a traffic jam that making a bigger road will solve traffic jams. And of course it doesn't. Why doesn't it? Because what creates traffic is not the number of cars. What creates traffic is more important even than the number of cars, is the number of trips and the length of trips. For example, if you have 10 cars doing 1 kilometer each, they create the same traffic as one car that does 10 kilometers. We agree? And so clearly we are not going to solve traffic jams making bigger roads, and everybody knows already. But it seems that we all know it, but the pressure continues to make more and more roads, especially in the developing world. This is the third level of the Mexico City Beltway, Shanghai, Sao Paulo. I mean, these cities, Now, we don't know any city that has solved traffic problems with making bigger roads. Clearly, public transport is the only solution, but the solution to mobility, not to traffic. Low-cost, high-frequency public transport require density. And here we go into an area, density, which is very much of a dirty word. We should maybe not even use it because some people, each person understands something different when we mention this word. This is the problem. If Bogota had the density of Portland, Bogota would be more than 10 times bigger than it is today. So clearly, we would have 10 times longer distances, 10 times more expensive transportation costs. We cannot have low-cost, high-frequency mobility if we have spread out cities. So we need compact cities. Low density, of course, means high global warming, and it means a very boring environment because you don't see people in the street. If we have to take the car to go buy milk or bread, it means the city is not well designed. It doesn't work well. We have to be able to walk, at least for those basic, to the drugstore, to buy basic foods. I mean, young people are trapped. I mean, in any good city, a 12-year-old child should be able to be free to go out, take a bicycle, go take a bus. If you have to be driven by your mother, clearly this is not a well-designed city. Now, if we have high densities, everything works well. Bicycles, taxis, buses, trains, subways, trams, whatever. In Portland, the real transport challenge, environmental challenge, quality of life challenge is to achieve higher densities. And I will propose something which may be very controversial to you. We must remember that we are creating cities not for the next 30 years, but for the next 3,000 years. So some big efforts perhaps is well worth doing it. Portland metropolitan area has 2 million inhabitants now, and I am told we'll have 1 million more over the next 20 years or maybe a little more or whatever. And of course, Portland itself, when people come here, is good for the environment because they require little heating and the weather is pleasant, and so it's not like going to Texas. So, yeah, it's environmental. It's much better to live in Portland than to live in Texas because you need much more energy for now. But high densities cannot be just a matter of brownfield developments. Now, I think to have high density, we need to demolish a lot of inner suburbs. This is a requirement. Why not imagine the following? Demolish 300 or 500 acres of inner suburbs and to redo it. Here in the United States, we have, especially we, the lovers of urban issues, such as you and I, we admire very much Jane Jacobs. She was fantastic. She wrote the best book for about cities and all this. However, in the United States, people were traumatized. After that, nothing can be done. We cannot touch anything. If two neighbors say hello to each other in the street, then this is a great community and we cannot demolish anything, you know. And so nothing can be done, nothing. You know, many, everywhere in the world, many projects of redevelopment have been done. When I was a student in Paris, it was a 200-year-old neighborhood. It was completely demolished and redone, and what was redone was fantastic, and it works extremely well. And the people whose homes are demolished can be there, of course, there. But if not, where are we going to achieve the densities? Because now, it's not so traumatic for people to change homes, really, I mean, because actually they move all the time. On average, maybe the people stay in a home here, in a house, maybe 8 years, 7 years, no? So, and they could stay in the same. Here, for example, I saw this house on the bicycle yesterday. They were selling it, you know? And maybe people move because they got a new job, because they want to change the house to a bigger one, smaller one, whatever. So, conservation. I mean, of course, the older houses in a city in the United States are the inner suburbs, because that's the ones that were first built 80, 90 years ago. But when we talk conservation, we must remember it's not for the next 30 years. It's for the next 3,000 years that we're going to. Is it really that many houses that are worth conserving for 3,000 years that we cannot touch? I am not so sure. But again, now, why would people want to demolish their homes and make the new high-density environment? Because it would be a great business. Maybe somebody who has a $200,000 house could sell it for $400,000 or maybe $300,000 and still live there. and maybe live there with a much bigger park, better gardens, wonderful things. So, for example, this is the things we have to demolish, these big gardens, or even, But if we are not going to have high densities in the inner suburbs, where are these million new people who are going to come to Portland going to live? Where? Where is it that you think they're going to live? Here, for example, in the bicycle yesterday, we were riding here. There is a fantastic park here. I think if this was maybe 15-story high, it would be wonderful. It would maybe with I'm saying sinful things, I know, but if we had maybe 50 feet wide sidewalk, maybe very high, maybe the park would work much better. Do you think Central Park would work better with these kind of houses around Central Park? Or do you think Central Park works much better with the high density around it? Sometimes high density is interesting, but what I am going to propose to you is not Manhattan. This is exactly my proposal to you. This is the kind of thing that could be demolished, and this is just what I took in the bicycle yesterday, These gardens, lots of chemicals, lots of things, and I am very happy they exist because they give jobs to many Colombians and Mexicans who mow the lawns, But normally, nobody does anything there. I lived once in a suburb in the United States, and even some houses in the suburb had bigger gardens than the parks, but children would never want to be in the garden. This is very boring because what children want is to be with other children, and other children were in the park, So actually, even when people have a garden, not even the only thing they use, well, some people do garden, but most people, maybe sometimes they do a barbecue, but even the barbecue, they do it next to the house, so they don't have to walk across the garden back and forth and all of this. So maybe instead of a garden like this, which is useless, you could have fantastic greenways, giant 20-mile greenways, great parks, which would be much more fun, where people would meet. And this may be more interesting, but though this is the kind of things that we may demolish, so the question is. So light rail is totally underutilized with low density. This is light rail. How much have you invested of your taxes? You invest every day on this light rail, and then you have this in front. What a waste. You could have much better service, because if you have high density, the train would not go every 15 minutes or so, or every 20 minutes, but every 2 minutes. So it's much more fun. You could really go take it, you don't waste time, Look at this, You could have much higher densities all around it, but this is not only not promoted by government, is not allowed. At this time, I am sure, I don't know the regulations, but I could be sure that if some of these people would get, 10 neighbors would get together, that they want to make a big building, they would not be allowed. The regulations would not allow them to do it. So, what do we want? I'm just questioning. I don't live here. And I can say this because I'm not trying to get elected here, of course. Now, this is the luxuries we have. Now, is it possible? The people who live in the suburbs is not because they are stupid, They are finding in the suburbs many things that the suburbs provide them. They provide them green, flowers, safe spaces, ironically, safe spaces for the children to ride bicycles with very little traffic, safe. So, can we provide those things they seek there, great schools, all of this, in much higher environments, density, but even better, much more green, much safer spaces for the children to ride bicycles, pedestrian networks of streets, Now, more important than the height of buildings, which is not irrelevant, is what happens when the buildings reach the ground. Is it big sidewalks, wonderful places to, for example, this. Is this building in front of these people, which is my wife and my son, 30-story high or 3-story high? Maybe who cares? Much more important is whether the place around it is fun. And it's not a great place, but it's decent at least. What happens in the ground? Does public space around new buildings become more pleasant to be in, to play, to talk, to kiss? The new density I am suggesting cannot be just about tall towers with tiny sidewalks. It has to be about a radically different, happier, more beautiful and better habitat. Not this. This may be a wonderful building. I have nothing against the architecture. Besides, it has beautiful windmills on top and all that. But, it's just I found it. I have nothing. I think it's great. But Look at this. I mean, I would not want to live there with my children. I would not want to look at these cars there, a little tiny sidewalk there. I mean, this is not what I think. I mean, it's not just what I am proposing to you in Portland is not to do a little Manhattan. No, I think we can do something different and better. And why is interesting Portland? Because Portland is a leader, and it could maybe invent something totally different than exists yet, you know? These buildings, for example, are maybe wonderful. I have nothing against it, but clearly look at this little tiny sidewalk on this thing, you know? And I would not want to be there with my children. This is not a place. Maybe it's good for yuppies, for young people, for single people without children, but you know. And it's great. I have nothing against it, but this is not what I'm talking about. That's not what I am talking about. This is not what I am talking about. Not what I am talking about, you know. Now, this is not what I am talking about, you know. This is density, but when we mention the word, this dirty word, people imagine this many times, you know, so we have to be extremely careful. Now, this is the kind of greenways which could crisscross our new dense city, hundreds of kilometers, you know, crisscrossed by greenways, pedestrian and bicycle-only promenades, streets only for buses, you know, things like this. This is an interesting city in the Netherlands, Houten. It's a city where you can only go across by bicycle. You can reach by car, but you can only go. Under here goes the train in this area in particular. High density. High density does not need to be 30-story high, you know. Only bicycle, only pedestrian, you know. You could have much higher density, but it's more this kind of thing. Why not have a competition in Portland? Take 500 hectares. Once I was a jury in the Heinz ULI program for a couple of years. Why don't we invest for nothing? Students in the United States, for nothing, they would do amazing work. You put $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, which in Portland's budget is nothing, and you do a competition for 300 or 400 or 500 acres to reinvent an area which could be redone with a lot of green, a lot of pedestrian, a lot of, no. Anyway, let's go quickly. This high density does not need to be 30-story high, and it's sustained. This is not what I like. This is little tiny sidewalks, but this is the type of structure anyway. Let's go quickly. High density, of course, will have great parks, like here. Now, why do people, wealthy citizens in Zurich or Paris or London or New York use public transport? It's not because they love public transport. It's not because they love the environment. It's because they have to. So imagine if you try to use your car in Manhattan. You don't have to where to park it. It's too expensive. It's too slow. So if we want people to use public transport, we have both to improve public transport and restrict car use somehow. Now, mobility. Public transport will solve mobility, as I mentioned. Buses, trains, trams, whatever. But it will not solve traffic jams. London, which is the same population as Bogota, has 1,800 kilometers, 1,800 kilometers of subway and rail and trains. And still they had to charge, congestion charge, in order to solve a little bit the problem of traffic jams. And so mobility you solve with public transport, but you will not solve traffic jams. How do you solve traffic jams? Restricting car use. How do you restrict car use? You can use congestion charges in London, but the most obvious way to restrict car use is to restrict parking. This is the most, in London, in central London, for more than 40 years, new office buildings, for example, have not been able to do parking. The advance it is more and more restricted. Giant office complexes, such as Canary Wharf, no parking, zero parking. A few for a handicap or something, but no more. Now, for example, wherever there is space for curbside parking, there is space to make bigger sidewalks. I mean, has anybody voted in Manhattan where they prefer bigger sidewalks or bikeway instead of this parking, for example? I don't know. Parking is not a constitutional right, you know? If the mayor takes away the parking and then the people say, now where should I park? He can tell them, look, it's the same as if you come to me to ask, where should you put your clothes or your food? This is not my problem, you know? You can put it wherever you want, you know? All I'm trying to say to you, I should not say how you should use the streets in Portland. It's your city. I don't know. All I'm trying to say is that this is not a technical issue. This is a political issue. It's not like the mayor calls, you know, like for example, look, road space is the most valuable resource the city has. You could find oil or diamonds under Portland. It would not be so valuable as road space. So the question is, how do you distribute this road space between pedestrians, bicyclists, public transport, and cars? So this is in London, for example. See, there is much bigger sidewalks than space for motor vehicles. It's not because the mayor of London asked permission to some transport engineer. This is a political decision. If there was more space for cars in London or in Paris or in New York, there would be more cars. If there was less space, there would be less cars. As simple as that, you know? So all I'm saying is, you can do whatever you want with your streets, but there is nothing technical about it or legal about it. This is your decision. You as citizens are the ones who have this extremely valuable space, and you decide how to use it. It will not create more traffic jams if you have bigger sidewalks or less, if you have bigger roads. It will not change anything in terms of traffic. Now, if cars carry so much social, environmental costs, I think it's logical that we should charge higher fuel taxes to subsidize public transport. In Bogotá, we were able to increase the tax on fuel 25% to put a tax on fuel, surcharge tax, in order to finance the public transport. Initially, we put it just for Bogotá, and of course, people would go get gas in the next municipality. So we got the Congress to approve it for the whole country. And of course, still not enough. We need much more. Now, but we need, of course, public transport. Subways and trams, I will finish very quickly, are wonderful, you know, but I think buses are very wonderful too. And I will go now to defend buses. Why? Because if we want only talk about trams and rail, we will not be able to solve mobility, mass transit in the world. I mean, here we're going to have these giant cities built in China, in India, in Indonesia, in Latin America, and if we think that the solution is rail, we will never be able to do it. And I think it's extremely dangerous to stigmatize it. You know, the people in Bogotá, in all developing countries, the most fervent, the most radical defenders of subways are the upper income people, you know? They all want subways. They have not the slightest intention, it has not crossed their mind to use the subway, you know? They just think that they will put lower income people underground, you know, because these are and so that they will have more space for their cars. You know, we are talking about very unequal societies. These upper income people in all developing countries, they are very proud because they are experts using the New York subway and the Paris subway, but they would never use public transport in their own city, never. Unless it becomes so tough that it will take 2 hours in their car or 15 minutes in public transport. And so maybe they will. Buses. This is a very powerful symbol of democracy. This really shows when the cars are completely jammed and a bus with public transport goes by with low-income people or high-income people, hopefully too, next to the $100,000 car, that's democracy at work. Democracy is not just the fact that people go vote. This is democracy at work. You know, when the buses zoom by, the buses of the lower income people zoom by, and again, we are very happy this is Bogotá. Almost 20% of the users of this system are car owners. This is in Turkey, taking space away from the highways to give to buses. I think it's much better to have surface transport systems, like trams. This is one thing I like about trams, definitely. And not to put, we should not put people underground. We should not put public transport users, people underground, unless we have already used all the road space. Then we put them underground because it's still necessary. This is an interesting case. In Madrid, in this road coming from Coruña into Madrid, we get, the interesting thing about this bus system is that there are 2 rail lines almost parallel to this, coming into central Madrid. And the bus system moves almost twice as many, more passengers than the 2 rail lines added up together. Why? Why? Because the buses can go close to where people live, collect them, and once they get to the highway, they go just as fast as the train. Now, that's one thing that the tram cannot do. You know, we can get buses going through the neighborhoods, collecting people, and if they had a bus lane, they could, without people having to change, it's not a fear, they enter the bus lane and go quickly, you know? Now, if buses are so wonderful, why did London or Paris or these cities did not put buses, but subways? For one reason, the first subways were built in around 1860, 1870. And buses only appeared towards 1935, much later than cars, because the technology for pneumatic tires was not available yet for heavy vehicles. And in 1910, 1920, all streets were cobblestones, like in the Roman times. So imagine a solid rubber car going in these cobblestones, you know? It would be, so only in 1935. And in 1940, every city in the planet had, with more than 100,000 inhabitants, had trams. Every city, like 6 or 10 cities in Colombia, every city in the United States, in India, in Pakistan, everybody had trams. And when buses appeared, trams disappeared in a matter of 10 years. Why? Because at that time it was the opposite than now. Buses were sexy, and trams were the poor, for the poor, you know. Trams were the bad quality system. It's not because General Motors bought a few of this story. This is very nice, but this is not the problem. Trams at that time had a very bad image of being bad quality for the poor, and buses were exactly the opposite now. Why do buses have a bad image now? Because they have been used by the poor, by the Mexicans, the Colombians, the African Americans. So, and now trams are sexy for yuppies. So they attract, but they cost much more, but they do the same or less, you know? So, cost. Rail is very expensive. The problem is that the main cost for rail system is depreciation, and it's not well accounted for. So every so often, after 20, 30, 40 years, we have to change trains. And where is the money that you should have saved? If you had done good accounting and had the depreciation well done. It's never there. So government has to come out again and pay the money, put the money for more trains. So trams are beautiful. But buses can be beautiful too. This is in Denver. They did this bus line, for example, designed by this famous architect, I.M. Pei, and you know, you can have nice, this is in Bogota. Here you see, we have already done the trunkway for buses. These demolitions are being made to make bigger sidewalks, to make it nicer for people, to improve the environment for the public transport. This is not for the buses or for cars, this is pedestrian investment. Well done, I mean, spurring investment. Many things, one of the biggest arguments in the United States is that trams spur private investment, but buses don't. In Bogota, you know, here clearly they have spurred investment, the trams, you know, big towers, and it's great. Maybe it's the trams, but maybe not, because, for example, in Salt Lake City, which is one of the first cities which had trams in the United States, is like a bombed out city. It's full of parking lots everywhere. Whenever you have a parking lot in the surface, it's like an indication that the density is too low, that land prices are too cheap. It's like the best indication. If you are able to have surface parking, it's because prices of land is too low, you know? So, in Bogota, I don't like shopping malls for other reasons we don't have time to go into, but the fact is that all shopping malls over the last 10 or 15 years, after Transmilenio have been located on Transmilenio trunkways. Clearly, Transmilenio, not because Transmilenio is in all the main roads. It's only about 25% of the main roads. So this is a sign that says, buy here the apartment and you will make money because the Transmilenio is coming through here. Will increase the value of your building. See, here this study by the biggest construction company in Bogota says that the 69% of the decision to buy a home is whether it's located near Transmilenio in Bogota. 69% is more important than anything else, living close to your parents or anything, or far from your parents or whatever, you know. So from your father's parents-in-law, whatever. Anyway, no, I love my mother-in-law anyway. But here, the biggest construction company in Bogota for housing, a giant, the way they advertise their projects is they put this map of Transmilenio and they locate their projects along the Transmilenio trunkways. All of this is to make sure that if a bus system is well done, it also does the same thing as a rail system. It increases. And I am not saying you should not do your trams. I'm just trying to talk of in terms of international uses. Trams are wonderful if you have the money, but in Bogota we have so much poverty. And if we really want to go with public transport everywhere, the only way to go is with buses. Even here, it's so much more expensive to do trams that you cannot go with trams everywhere. You have to go with buses to many places. Now, here is next to my hotel, the tram and the parking lot. So clearly not always you get in very rapid transformations. Or here is again from my hotel, the tram, another parking lot. So there are many variables. Trams are wonderful to increase, of course, investment, but there are many other variables as well. Now listen. People sometimes say, oh, we cannot put exclusive lanes both for buses or for trams there because there is too much traffic. That's where we need the most to have that's where it works the best. Where you have the most traffic, that's where it works really well. Sometimes people would tell us, oh, we cannot go with the buses there because the street is too narrow and there is not enough space. So we have to say, yes, you're right, there is not enough space. There will not be cars there, only buses. Because it's a democracy. So clearly, buses should have a right. So here, some street, the main street in Bogota, only in the downtown, one of the most important streets, we put only buses and pedestrians. Or in the Netherlands, some streets just with buses and pedestrians. Or some trams in Zurich, only trams, no cars. Or in Melbourne, different. Or in other Colombian city, only buses, no. So why not think different when we are thinking of this new city and to create networks of hundreds of kilometers of roads just for buses and bicycles and pedestrians? It would work like a subway, fantastic. People could walk around, very safe, Trams or buses, it doesn't matter, but only public transport plus pedestrians. This is a new way of organizing cities, hundreds of kilometers like this. If we would plan the cities well, we would not need subways and many of these things. This is, again, in Bogota, one of the most important streets. We took cars out, only bus and pedestrian. I'm going to finish very quick in 2 minutes. Now, the issue is not technical, it's political. Transmilenio is moving 47,000 passengers our direction. This is more than all subways in the planet, except for 4 or 5. And this, with some improvements, it could easily go to 60,000. At this time, it has many problems. It's too full, it's all kinds of problems, but I am certain it can be solved. In Rio de Janeiro, they are making some super BRTs now. With 84 kilometers in operation, Transmilenio is moving 1.7 million passengers every day. Now, very quickly, this is an interesting BRT system in Guangzhou, a 12 million inhabitant city in China, because it does exactly what I tell you they could do in Portland. They leave the trunkway, they go through the regular shared traffic streets, they bring the people from the neighborhoods, and then they enter the trunkway, and they go in the trunkway very quickly, which is what trams cannot do, for example. Now, let's go quickly. We don't have time to go into this. Now, rail has an advantage. It's less bumpy. That's good. And I love rail. Again, I'm just trying to say we need to be careful because we say rail is good and buses are bad, then we will not be able to solve mobility in the developing world. Now, if we had only 5% of fuel, let's say it's a war, an earthquake, a volcano explodes, and we only had fuel for 5% of the vehicles in the city, to whom would we give it? Clearly to buses and trucks, otherwise the city would collapse, it would die. It's a matter of survival. Now, if what is scarce is space, clearly what is rational is to give priority to public transport. Now, and I finish. This is the end. Car-less cities are not some kind of crazy hippie's dream. They already exist. Cities which are almost without any cars, Manhattan, center of London, Zurich, not only do they exist, they are the most successful cities in the planet. They are the one with the highest real estate prices, with the highest tourist visits, with the most investment, with the art and everything happening there. So this is not totally crazy, but I think they are not possible. We could invent some which are much better still. And I think Portland, which has been a leader in so many ways, this is a place where this new, great, better, dense city could be invented. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to have questions.
We're going to open it up to question and answer right now, Q&A.
Comments or criticism, whatever.
Whatever you want. So Jenny has the microphone. So if you just, who has a question? Right there behind you, Jenny.
So I would happily stipulate that we could remove many cars from our roads and have a better city. But where would the freight go?
The freight, of course. If it was not for freight, it would be great to have traffic jams, because one of the real ways to stimulate, if we want people, I mean, most planners, I think many planners are here, the planners, the young planners who invited me, we all agree that what the ideal is, two things in a city, to have density and to have public transport use. The best way to achieve those two is traffic jams. Traffic jams are wonderful. And that would be fine if it were not for freight. So this is why in general, I think we have to be very liberal about having freight going into the city and not to put in too many restrictions of hours. We have to restrict a lot car use, car parking, and in many possible ways. High gasoline taxes, all kinds of things. But freight, I think, in my opinion, we should be as free as possible, because this is one way also to get more mixture of business and factories and housing and everything inside the city. So this is why we have to do everything possible not to have traffic jams, is for cities to be efficient and be able to have freight going through. Otherwise, I would not even worry about traffic jams.
We have the microphone because we're recording it, so that way it shows up on the audio.
Thanks. Thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. We have a bike path here in Portland. I don't know if you've ever been out the Springwater Corridor Trail. Have you been out there? Has anybody taken you?
No.
Interestingly, it connects part of the poorest part of the city with part of the richest part of the city. And a lot of my work involves dealing with some of the publicly owned land along this bike corridor. We have a pretty ongoing serious problem with transient use and people using that bike lane for not always the best intentions. I'm wondering.
What do you mean, like what, for example?
Drug use, stealing,
Yes.
prostitution, there's all kinds of things. So I was curious whether you encounter similar. We're trying to sort it out. I don't know who I might be offending by saying this, but in our sort of backwards way of funding things, I work for the city, so I can say this. In the city, my bureau, which is Environmental Services, can't spend money to help address the root problems, but we can spend money to clean it up. And it's very frustrating. So we just keep spending a lot of money to clean up the camps and to deal with the illegal behavior. I'm wondering if you have any sort of similar.
Of course, we have a lot of problems with crime in Bogotá. I mean, well, ideally, in fact, the greenways, as the parks, should have a lot of eyes on them. Buildings, windows, houses against them, shops, cafes. I don't really like so much this wild, I showed some of these wild greenways just as an example, an idea, like they are in these Toronto suburbs. But I think ideally you should have a lot of windows on the public space, and to have the integration of the city. And again, we are humans. This is an interesting discussion, because sometimes there is some very radical environmental positions which say that we have to have just forests and things. No, we have to create an environment for humans. Whatever is more pleasant and safer for humans, maybe some more hard surfaces and not sometimes. But our city is a very dense and compact city. And we do have, of course, all kinds of problems with drugs, crime, everything possible, but not so much on the bikeways, especially in the bikeways but we do have some areas in this long 24 kilometers, which goes to some of the poorest areas, where there were some gangs and people who would rob people and rob their bicycles and things. But as you say, the problem is not the bikeway. The problem is the other problems which are there anyways. You know, in Colombia, we have a story which say there was a husband that arrives at home and finds his wife being unfaithful to him on a sofa. So he gets very upset and goes and sells the sofa, you know. So the problem is not the sofa, you know. The problem is not the bicycle way, you know. But clearly, there are some designs that create more safety. And the design, of course, Jane Jacobs was the first one to explain a lot of this, of how the interrelationship between the private and public spaces, windows, shops, cafes, all of these things are the ideal things to try to achieve more safety, light, have more lighting, to have more life. Design can do, and I think one of the persons who have best explained this, or the best, is Jane Jacobs in this, and I think this is quite valid still. We have to have windows. It's crazy. I mean, we need windows on the public space. We may have to have bars on the first floor windows. In China, these things must be athletic because they have bars even the 20-story floor, you know. But we need windows on the public space. Windows, yeah, and activity, and light, and order, cleanliness, all of these things, which still is not substitute to solve all the other problems that you mentioned.
Right up there in the corner. Yeah, we're making a video, and so that's why I
No problem.
grabbed the microphone.
So a lot of what you talked about was removing parking spaces, and I know that a lot of the arguments we hear are that the city gets a lot of funding through those parking spaces and funds to do things like, you know, bike lanes and pedestrian improvements and all those other things. So I'm curious how you would address taking out parking and sort of removing that funding source, and how you were able to fund a lot of the improvements that you did in Bogota.
One of the advantages of a talk like this is that I don't have to be too worried about the practicalities. But you know, sometimes the most difficult part, in Spanish in particular, we have even a saying that says, oh, to dream is easy, you know, like saying dreaming is, no, I think the most difficult thing to do is to dream, to have clear what we want. If we go out to the street and we ask anybody in the street how their ideal home would be, they know exactly how the ideal home would be. In which neighborhood, how big, with a balcony, what color, whether you have this wooden floor or rug. I mean, but if we ask them how the ideal city would be, they have no idea. So I think first we have to know what the ideal is. For example, to me, I wonder how much these things provide, these parking fees. I doubt it would be very much, but for example, it's the most obvious tax that we have to have, that is everywhere in the world except the United States because it's somewhat sinful and is very much a matter of political campaigns, is the surcharge tax on gasoline. You know, clearly, if we have a resource which is running out, we know it's going to run out. We need people to learn to use less of it. It's good for the environment. It's good for the economy. It's good for independence. It's good for everything. Clearly, we should try to not stimulate people to use it, you know? Why don't we charge it? Clearly, if we have much higher gasoline, by the way, it's interesting. In Europe, where they have extremely high taxes on gasoline, it's not that people drive less, but at least they have much smaller cars. But this is a much better way to collect funds. But I mean, when we are talking here, let's say we do one experiment in Portland. And we do, like in this street, we do a 20-mile super highway of bicycles. We take 1 or 2 lanes away from cars and make a fantastic. We are not going to get rid of all of Portland's parking all at once. Maybe we'll do 2 or 3% in this big project. Will take 5 years. So the important thing is to imagine, to put it in a drawing, to discuss it, to imagine that this would be possible, to question, you know, and then I don't think the parking money is collected from, it would be that much. And if we really want to find alternative sources, I think, again, the ideal thing is to charge for fuel. But, of course, I understand perfectly why this is politically very difficult, but we are not going to get rid of all the parking all at once. I mean, just very, very marginal, even for a big project.
Right up here.
You said that the problem isn't technical, that it's political, and I'm curious to know, in the work that you did, who were your biggest political enemies, the people who you had to push hardest against, and how did you win over them? How did you change their minds?
Well, why do I say, of course, we need technical information too, of course. You know, I'm just making an exaggeration, but clearly what I say is the following. For example, when I come, the developing country cities have horrible traffic problems. They don't move, you know? And if you would bring a Martian in a flying saucer and say, for example, solve the mobility problem in this city, what will the Martian say? Look, for example, Bogota, it has about 17,000 kilometers of road lanes, you know? It's very obvious, you know, you take these cars out and you put buses. I mean, if you want to really solve the mobility, in a month, you will solve the problem. You will give buses exclusive lanes, and any city's mobility problem will be solved in a matter of days. Why isn't it done? Because it's politically difficult. Now, the question of you, who are my enemies? Well, I had many, because, for example, many of the things we haven't talked here about, for example, I tried to turn the most exclusive country club golf course into a public park, you know, which was in the middle of a city, you know, where the richest and most powerful Colombians were members. We, at least, were able to turn the polo fields into a public park, and even to question that this should be a park is almost like communism, you know, nobody had dared even touch them, you know. We also did, for example, we had so many battles, but the most important and the most difficult one was to get cars off the sidewalk. This was amazing, and we even put bollards. There was a movement to impeachment. We put bollards. If you took to any Colombian and you say, you know, if you mention the word bollard, whom do you think about? And immediately say Peñalosa. And of course, these shop owners who did not want to be taking their parking away, they went to collect signatures to impeach me, and they paid a lot of money to impeach me. And of course, they could not say is that they wanted to park on the sidewalk. So it was even there. It was absurd. So they would say is that I had a bollard factory or something, my family or my brother or something. I mean, some crazy story which was never even in the press or anything, but even to today, politically, is many people in Bogota, 40% think I had some business with bollards or something. So, so in these countries with low education, it's amazing the lies you can tell people. And the poor people, they believe these crazy stories, you know, even if it's never in the press or anything. So, but to go in a more general sense, always it's difficult to change. When we talk again about sidewalks, in many cities in the world where I work, for example, we find that in these medium-sized cities, maybe 50,000, 100,000 inhabitant cities, which are very still lively centers, the shopping malls come and destroy the shops in downtown. And so you tell the shop owners downtown, look, we have to make big sidewalks, nice sidewalks. And they will want the cars to park almost inside the shop. You know? And I say, why is the shopping mall killing you? It's not because the people park next to the shop. On the contrary, they park very far, and sometimes they walk miles, you know. But in the shopping mall, they have a very nice walking environment, you know, level. The child lets go. It's almost a pedestrian city. The child let go of the parent's hand. So we have to learn much from the shopping malls to improve the streets even, you know, because but it's so difficult, you know, even when it's the matter of their survival. So change is always difficult. Change is always difficult. I will just give you one more example. At one time, long time ago, I was vice president of the Bogota Water Company. And maybe we were one of the first companies I decided we are not going to buy any more typewriters, only computers. You know, it was even before private companies and all this stuff said, and we sent everybody to classes to take computer lessons, and they were so proud and so happy. And the secretaries, everybody, they went 2 weeks for the lessons, and they would come and they had the computer there, and they put a flower pot on top of the computer and continue to work on the typewriter. You know, so change is always difficult. Change is always difficult.
Okay, let's take a question right up here on top, and then we'll video.
You mentioned the transit-oriented development, the busway that Transmillennial that transformed, and the developer markets that as an access to the surrounding areas. You mentioned also the 24-kilometer bike highway. Is there bike-oriented development that's happening? And then a flippant comment or question is, when are you hosting the Portland contingent for a technical tour? Because it sounds like there are so many fascinating things in Bogota we learn from.
Oh, well, Bogota has much more problems and bad things than good things. You would be disappointed. Some interesting examples succeeded, and I think they're very interesting. No, you know, it's amazing, but people have not quite fully, even moreover, I tell you something completely crazy. Many of the developments which put houses next to this amazing pedestrian and bicycle highway, they did not put the windows against they put the, how do you call it in Spanish, called the culata of the building, not the window against the, this is crazy. They should have completely been open against this pedestrian street and all of this. Even though in Bogota, for a low-income person, to use a bicycle to go to work, they save, for a minimum wage earner, up to 20% of their income. It's huge. I mean, imagine if any of us, we would get 10 or 15% more income. We would change our way of life. And then for a low-income person, even more. But not enough of this has been done in terms, really not on the contrary, we need to do much more to support bicyclists, more bikeways, more. We have some stations of the Transmilenio system where they have bicycle parking, but very few. We need much more, even to provide people with. In Bogota, we have more rain than Portland, believe it or not. It rains more and much harder. And it's cool, by the way. Bogota is 2,600 meters of altitude, so it's very cool. It's cooler than these days we have had here. So people put the plastic bags, like supermarket plastic, in their shoes, and they don't even have rubber pants or anything. So government should help them provide. We have a long way to go to do. And the other question was this, was bicycle, and the other one was that?
When are you hosting?
Oh, no.
Okay. You want to answer?
Welcome. We organize, whenever you decide to organize a tour, I will help you organize good, interesting visits. Bogota is a city with huge poverty. This is why we have to be very careful. You know, Bogota, we have like 1 million people without pavement in front of their homes at this time. We have improved this very much before. So we are talking about huge poverty. This is why it's completely mad. This is why you have to be very careful how to invest the little money we have. If we can solve the problem with a bus, I think it's immoral to invest in a subway line to solve the same thing, because we have so many needs, you know. So if we have enough money to do everything, fine. I mean, here you can invest in trams or whatever you want, and you still have money for everything, that and the other. But in Bogota, we have to be extremely careful with the very scarce resources that we have, because the alternatives are very critical, even in terms of transport.
Kind of two questions. In this country, we kind of see taxes as the government taking our money, and we need to see it as us paying for a service. How best do you suppose that we do that? And then also, how do we get those that are paying for that service, which is generally the upper income earners, to pay for a service that is largely taken advantage of by the lower income earners?
Well, this is very interesting what you say, because there is one thing that happened in Bogota. Before I was mayor, there was this mayor, very creative. He was only like 1.5 years and he quit, but he was very special, but very former president of the National University, and then he came after me. We supported him, and he won. And when I finished my term, people were so happy with everything that was happening that this mayor asked them about 1 month later after he came in, people if they wanted to pay 10% extra tax to the city, you know? And about more than 70,000 people paid regularly the 10% extra tax because clearly showed they thought the people were not going to steal their tax and they were going to invest it in things they liked. Clearly, this is a very interesting because sometimes things that governments can do give you a lot of pleasure that will give you, I mean, I think most of the people will derive more pleasure from having a park in front of their homes or near their homes than from having and to changing a new jacket every year, you know? And some of the things the government provides, even the biggest billionaire cannot buy. I mean, even the biggest billionaire cannot have a park for himself, you know? Even he can have a big garden, but that's not a park. The park, so I think at some point we understand that some of the things that government does give you more pleasure than to have an extra private spending. This is a very beautiful moment when society reaches that. Maybe the best way to achieve this is if you allow people to know more exactly where their taxes are going to go, you know? It does not go into a whole basket where they will be pulled for one thing or the other, but in this case, when people were asked to pay voluntary taxes, it was an interesting thing, like they were giving to an NGO, except it was government, you know? Not anymore. The last mayor who was mayor the last period is now in jail, you know? People are, but I think it's possible to if you really are, you know, this is one thing that is magical about public pedestrian space and parks and things like this. Most things government do are means, which are necessary. You have to invest in means, you have to invest in roads, you have to invest in ports, you have to think, but means, why? Because means that will make you richer, more developed, something, and in the end, of course, you say that if you do that, you are happier. Public pedestrian space, such as bikeways or parks, is not a means to an end. It's an end in itself. It makes you happier. You know, to have a great park, you can, and it's also a magical good. A great public space is like a magical good. If you go buy something in the store, you know, you will be very happy when you buy it. But 1 month later, it will give you much less pleasure. 6 months later, much less, and then, you know. Public pedestrian space is magical. You can have a beautiful plaza or something in front of your window. You can look at it 50 times a day. You can go there, and it never diminishes its capacity to provide joy. So, for example, for these kind of things, I think people will be very happy to pay more taxes.
Okay, so we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So does anyone have a heated question? Okay, where are you at? Raise your hand. Okay, right down here.
Thank you. So one of the things that you said that I kind of bulged my eyes out at was demolishing the inner suburbs of America. And I'm from New Jersey, which has 9 million people in the 47th smallest state in the Union. And it's not the inner suburbs that are the ones that are suffering or will suffer. It's the outer suburbs where it's McMansions, which are very large homes on very large tracts of lands that are underserved. So I don't think that in a place where in New Jersey it's demolishing, you know, a place that's right next to New York City is going to do much for the greater good. It's these places that are farther out, 50 miles out, 40 miles out from our big cities that are really making our great cities suffer. So
look, I am not saying we should demolish the inner suburbs because they have problems or because they are bad or in order to punish them, you know. Sometimes when you need to do a public work, you need to demolish, you need to pass a road. So it has always been, even in the United States, you have always used eminent domain. Even the most, there is nothing, and so you have always been able to buy homes, to do airports or to do roads, and it's not that you will demolish the people's homes to punish them. It's because you need this for something which is in the public good, that will make everybody happier. Now, when I am saying we have to demolish the inner suburbs, it's because that's where it's more logical, which is closest to all these services downtown, to all the jobs, to all the cultural activities, everything. And these people whom home you're going to demolish, they are not going to be kicked out. They can stay there. They just have to sit out maybe for a while to move for a couple of years while you do the project, and then they will come back to a better apartment with a much more fun urban design, with better parks, better transport, better everything, and they will still make a lot of money. They will make the house they will get. They will keep a $200,000 apartment, plus they will have $100,000 in their pocket as profit for having contributed their land to the process. So this is not. Now, sometimes it's necessary to do these things in order for society to advance. You know, this is why all constitutions, even the most radical capitalistic private property defendants think it's possible to use eminent domain at some times to take over some people's property. Again, to buy it, to pay not only fair amount, but to pay more than is necessary. Because now, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? Let's say we don't do this. You know, by the way, some other cities, in theory, would be much easier than Portland to do this. I was, for example, just in Birmingham, Alabama, about 3 or 4 months ago. Birmingham, Alabama is surrounded by, here the inner suburbs are very dynamic and lively and beautiful and full of energy. In Birmingham, they are collapsed. 70% of the homes are empty. The schools are closed. It's like amazing. It's like really like if some plague had come and it had, you know, and you have a center city which has a lot of dynamism. For example, the giant University of Alabama with great medical research and all kinds of things. And even sometimes it's not even the people with children. I met, for example, several professors who are very famous and well paid and all of this. And they go to the suburbs very far. I mean, I'm sure they would be extremely happy if they could have some fantastic living next to and there we are not talking about something very conflictive. We are talking about something which is dead. I mean, it's really horrible what is happening there. Now, so the question is, I'm just proposing some ideas. You know, I'm not mayor here. I can say crazy thing, whatever. But the real question is, we all realize that spread out, low density has all kinds of problems. It has costs, it's not fun, young people are car dependent, but plus we are going to have 1 million more people in Portland over the next 20 years. Where do you think they should go? You know, and what I am saying is, everybody agrees in theory that density is good. But all I'm saying is, clearly, what the suburbs are providing people enjoy in terms of green and space for their children, you are not going to be able to solve it just making big buildings downtown, you know, big towers. This may be good for people without children, or even people, maybe even people without children like to have gardens and pedestrian and green and things. So what would you do? What are we going to do? When we think this is bad for the environment, for global warming, for having a more fun life, because the city is more compact, you will meet more neighbors in the street, you will be able to walk to the shop, to restaurants, all of these things. Where are you going to do it? There is one, you know, let me tell you, in Bogota, and in most of Latin America, in Bogota, 10% of the 10 richest percent, all of them live in buildings, which were, previously they were individual homes. And government did not intervene. This was a renewal, but which was privately done. People demolished the homes and they put buildings. But this is a very stupid way of doing it, because one way of doing it, where government would not even intervene at all, one way of doing it would be very simple. You would just change the regulation and you allow places where you now have houses to put 10-story high buildings, as long as you put big sidewalks or whatever, you know. And the people themselves, I can assure you, the market itself, in a matter of a few years, would transform this into apartment buildings, even in the richest, most dynamic areas. That's exactly where the first buildings would be built, because they are the most attractive neighborhoods. It's not in the most deteriorated ones that this would happen, on the contrary. But this is not a good way of doing it, because this private way of doing renewal will not yield any different urbanism, will not yield any bigger parks, it will not yield any bigger pipes, nothing. So we are done with much higher density, but with no improvement whatsoever in public spaces or in anything. So this is what has happened in Bogota, and in other places is not the more intelligent way of doing it. It's much better. Moreover, if we have low-income people and there is some kind of process of renewal, if private people do it, they will just buy from the poor and kick the poor out. If government intervenes, there are many schemes through which you can guarantee that the lower income people stay in the same area where they were living before. So it's a long story, but anyway, you are very patient. Thank you very, very much for everything. Thank you.